Hello and welcome to the Veterinary Anatomy Brainry. And today we are going to discuss about the joints. The study of joints, is called as orthology, also known as syndesmology. Syn means together, desmo means ligaments. That means where the bones are joined together by the ligaments and other things. You call that as syndesmology or orthology. Now, if you see the classification of the joints, you have so many joints in the body, being animals or the human beings. There are different types of the joints in the body, and usually these joints have the classification anatomically. They have the classification on the basis of the physiological functions. So here we can see the basic three types of the joints that are present inside the body of an animal, and those three are: the first one is called as a fibrous joint, the second one is called as a cartilaginous joint, and third one is called as a synovial joint. The fibrous joint is also known as synorthosis, or what you call as a fixed joint, or you call as a immovable joints. That means those joints which don't have any movement, or which are fixed at a particular place, and they are called as fibro joints. Then there is cartilaginous joints, the second type, what we call as epiorthosis, where there is involvement of the cartilage. Then the third one is the synovial joint, those joints which are the maximum in the body, or the synovial joints. The other name of the synovial joint is called as a diarthrosis. So let us see the first joint as the fibrous joints, and how the three are different from one another. So in case of the fibrous joints, usually the bony segments or the two bones are joined together by the fibrous tissue, and basically there will be the no movements because of this fibrous tissue. There will be no movements between the bodies, and usually the feature of synovial joint is the presence of the joint cavity. But in case of the fibrous joints, there is involvement of no joint cavities, and the uniting medium basically between the two bones is usually ossified, and that results in the synostosis. That means the fusion of the two bones with the result of no movement. So you have the big classification of these fibrous joints inside the body, and the best example of the fibrous joints are the sutures in the skull. So what is a suture? The suture basically is the joints of the skull. The bones of the skull usually have this type of joint, what you call as a suture. And usually the bones, if you see here in front of me, this is a skull of ox, and you see these are the bones, be it the frontal, be it the nasal, be it the parietal, temporal. So all these bones are joined together by this type of fibrous joint, and this type of fibrous joint in the skull is called as the sutures. So in the sutures itself, there is a big classification, and you have the first type of the suture, what you call as suture serrata. Serrata means you have the irregular this interlocking margins. If you see serrata saw, if we have seen the saw has like these serrations. So these irregular serrations usually form a joint, what we call as a suture serrata. And where in the skull you can find what is the example of the suture serrata. So you have the interfrontal suture. So interfrontal bones we have to see. So in this skull there is, so this is the part of the frontal bone. So the maximum part of the frontal bone has been removed. So let me show you to the another skull. So here in the other skull you can see, so this is the frontal bone, one frontal, this is the right frontal bone part, this is the left. So the suture, this one, so this type of the suture where there is a irregular like saw shaped interlocking margins, this is called as a suture serrata. So the example of interlocking sutures, irregular interlocking margins forming the suture serrata is interfrontal suture. The second one is suture scamosa. Suture scamosa means where one bone is on the other bone. So the suture will be, suppose this my hand is one of the bone, part of the bone, and the other hand is like this. So this bone will not connect it like this, it will be connected like this. So it will be like the edges of the bones are what you call bevelling. Bevelling means there will be the depression on this bone, so bevelling will be on this area, and this will just fit in those depressions. So the edges will be bevelling and it will be overlapped. So the suture will be like this, and the best example is parietal and squamous temporal. So you know that this is the temporal, squamous part of the temporal, and this is the parietal. So this suture is basically the example of this. You have the bevelling here, what you call a suture scamosa. So this is the suture scamosa here. Then the third one is suture plana, also known as suture harmonia, and usually the suture area between the two bones is very plain, and they are slightly roughened. So the best example is internasal. This is the nasal bone. So internasal. So this suture is the example of the suture plana. So this is example of the suture plana, where the two edges, the edge of this bone and the edge of this bone is almost plain and slightly rough. So suture plana is here, suture serrata is between these two bones, and then you have the suture scamosa, that is somewhere here between parietal and the scamus. Then the fourth one is suture follata. Follata means leaf. So in this type of the suture, usually the one of the bone will be having like a fissure like this in my hand, and one of the bone will be fitting like this. So the suture will be like this. So two fingers I am making a fissure like thing, and they will be fitting like this. So the example of this suture follata type is frontal and sphenoid bone. So here this will be the frontal bone here that has been removed, and if you know that sphenoid is this way, so this is the sphenoid part. So if you look out on the front side of the sphenoid, that is somewhere inside here. So the frontal bone here will be forming with the sphenoid. The type of the suture will be the suture follata. So these are the examples of the sutures, and the suture itself is a fibrous joint. The second type of the fibrous joint we call as a syndesmosis. So syndesmosis, basically what you have, it is also the example of the fibrous joints, and it is between the shafts of the long bone. So if you know that this bone is the radius ulna, so this is the radius ulna, so this is the radius and this is the ulna. So this is the shaft of ulna and this is the shaft of radius, and they are joined here. And they are joined here by the connective tissue. And this type of the joint, because there will be no movement between these two bones, because in the fibrous joint the main thing is that there should be no movement. So between these two bones there is no movement, and this type of joint is classified as the syndesmosis. So this is the syndesmosis type of joint. And the third one is usually, that is in the teeth, that is a gymphosis. So gymphosis means the implantation of the teeth. So you can see here, these are called as the sockets. So these are called as the sockets, and this is the teeth in the socket, and this type of joint is called as gymphosis. So here also there is no movement in the teeth, and with that of the alveoli. So these are called as alveoli, and this type of joint is also in the classification of the fibrous joint. So these are three types of the fibrous joints. One is suture, one is syndesmosis, and one is the gymphosis. Now the second type of the joint that is present in the body is called as a cartilaginous joints, and you have basically two types of the cartilaginous joints. So you know that there are cartilages in our body. One is the hyaline cartilage, one is the fibrocartilages. So the classification is on the basis of the which cartilage is involved between the bones. So one of the classification is synchondrosis, and in the cartilaginous joints, where there is involvement of the cartilage between the bones, the uniting medium is the cartilage. So you have the synchondrosis, the first type in the cartilaginous joints, and where there is involvement of the hyaline cartilage. And this type of joint is also called as a primary joint, or what you call as synchondrosis or hyaline cartilage joints. So here the hyaline cartilage plays a role between the joints, and usually the two opposing surfaces are connected together by the hyaline cartilage. You know, this is a long bone. The long bone has a feature, it has a shaft, what you call as a diaphysis, and it has two ends, what you call as epiphysis. But these two ends, be it this end or this end, they are connected here to the shaft, what you called as, here they are connected by the shaft, what you call as epiphyseal palate, that's called as a growth palate here. And that epiphyseal palate usually is cartilaginous in young age. So if I am making a epiphyseal palate here, so epiphyseal palate will be somewhere like this. So this part of the bone, so this what I am marking as a red, will be as epiphyseal palate, and it will be cartilaginous in the embryonic lives or in afterwards also. But when this bone gets fully developed, this increase in the length of this bone be on this side or this side is because of this epiphyseal, because the cartilaginous cells will change into the bone cells and there is the increase in the growth. So once the proper length of this bone is achieved, this whole of the epiphyseal palate will be converted into the gets the ossified, and there will be no cartilaginous joints and there is no increase in the length of this bone. So these epiphyseal palates between the epiphysis and the shaft is the example of the synchondrosis or the hyaline, because the cartilage here is the hyaline cartilage. This side or this side, the cartilage is the hyaline cartilage. So this bone has fully developed, there is no cartilage here. And if you have seen in the young one somewhere a bone, you have seen that this sometimes comes off or this end comes off, because the cartilage is still there and the break in the joint that time is at the cartilage level. So this is the example of in the cartilaginous joint, this is the example of synchondrosis, or this type of joint is called as a primary joint, also known as hyaline cartilage joint. The second one is the symphysis. So symphysis, in the symphysis type of cartilaginous joints, you have the involvement of the fibrocartilage, and this type of joint is also called as secondary cartilaginous joints. So you have the example sorry. So you have the example of symphysis, fibrocartilaginous joints. You have the example also known as secondary cartilaginous joints. So here the two bones are involved or united by this what you call as a fibrocartilage. So the best example is, this is the pelvic bones. So these are basically 1, 2, and 3 pelvic bones here, 1, 2, 3, and here they are connected together. This side you can see. So this is the area where there will be the fibrocartilage. So this bone is connected here by this fibrocartilage. So this is the best example of symphysis, that is a fibrocartilage, because here the fibrocartilage will be present, and that is comes under the classification of secondary cartilaginous joints. And the joints that are maximum in our body, the third classification of the joint is the synovial joints. And usually the feature of the synovial joint is, if you see here, so see here, this is the type of synovial joint. So these and this bone are joined here, and this type of joints are called as synovial joints, where there is a presence of the joint cavity. So this is one of the example of the synovial joints. There should be the presence of the joint cavity. Then that joint cavity is lined by the joint capsule, and there is appreciable movement, because you have then the classification of the joints according to movements, and the synovial joints are the best that show a good amount of movements. And the features of this joint, what are the features, how we can call a joint as a synovial joint? There are so many features that we will be discussing in the next lecture. What are the features of the synovial joints? So these type of joints are maximum in the body, what we call synovial joints. And this is about the broad classification of the joints that is inside the body. And thank you.